sheep country. It's at a place called Ruffy in Victoria, Australia. The land varies in height from 1,500 feet to 2,500 feet, so the rainfall is quite high, an average of 30 inches a year, mostly during the winter. That's quite a lot of rain for Australia, so there is usually plenty of water for the sheep. You can see here where most of Australia's sheep are to be found. On the drier inland plains, there are only a few to every acre, and they are grown mainly for wool. But on the slopes of the highlands, where the rainfall is higher, there are more sheep per acre, and they are grown for both wool and meat. It is here you find Ruffy. A typical farm near the township of Ruffy is Strathern, owned by Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson has worked here all his life, clearing the land, building fences, and putting up buildings. His sheep are the famous Merino breed, known throughout the world for their high-quality wool. The homestead is the center of the property, where the farmer and his family live. Then there are cottages where jackaroos and farmhands live, with their families, of course. In the equipment shed and workshops are many of the machines needed on a farm. The shearers' quarters and the shearing sheds are empty now, but soon it will be quite different. On a sheep farm like this, every member of the family is always busy. The mother in the house and out of doors, the daughters and the sons outside. Others are needed to help also. Jackaroos, boys who have come from both city and country and who want to make a career of farming. To round up the sheep, they must ride round the higher parts of the property and across the grazing hills and flats. The farm is surrounded by hills, and the whole area is enclosed with a boundary fence and is divided up into several paddocks. To ride right round the farm on horseback, the rider covers almost 16 miles. And a jackaroo must patrol this fence regularly, several times a week, repairing the breakages and blocking up holes in the rabbit-proof netting. The rabbits must be kept out of the grazing land. This is a familiar little fellow. Most people think he is quite harmless and do not realize how destructive he can be. In only 1 year, 2 rabbits can multiply into hundreds, and 7 rabbits can eat as much grass as 1 sheep. It is a constant job for the farmer to keep down the rabbit population on his land. At lambing time, the ewes must be collected from the far paddocks and driven into those nearby, because lambing ewes must be watched over constantly. This lamb has lost his mother, and rearing him will be a special responsibility for the younger members of the family. There is always something to do. The farmer does not just put his sheep out to graze on whatever grass there is. He is always trying to improve it so that he can carry more sheep. The Department of Agriculture helps by constant research to find the best types of pasture or grass for each area. They have many experimental plots throughout the state, and the farmer must keep up to date with scientific information. One scientific method to make the land richer is to spread superphosphate or other fertilizers over it every year. Sometimes this is done by plane. Supplies of superphosphate are collected in a hopper for quick loading. With this loading so well organized, The aircraft wastes little time on the ground. This is a very efficient method of spreading fertilizer. A greater area can be covered in a much shorter time. Also, the aircraft can cover areas which other machines cannot reach. The sheep farmer must also rotate his paddocks. He cannot use all his land all the time. He must rest some of it to keep it healthy. Rotation usually means that sheep are grazing on only about 2 out of every 3 paddocks at any one time. While the other paddocks are resting, some of them can be used for growing hay and silage. To make silage, the grass or pasture is allowed to grow only so far, just before the seed begins to ripen, and when the sap is still in the stalks. It is then cut and collected in one operation by this machine, which puts it down in large heaps. Next, it is picked up again by the prongs of the tractor attachment and deposited into stacks. Here, the continuous rolling action of the tractor wheels compresses it into a thick mass. After a while, this ferments and the grass becomes silage. It has been described as a gooey mass of smelly molasses, but the cattle like it. This feed can be stored in pits for many years without losing its goodness, and it can save the farmer who has planned well when drought comes or there is a shortage of feed. Some of the surplus grass in the resting paddocks is treated a different way. It is allowed to grow until the seed begins to ripen, and then it is cut for hay. On this job, the farmer finds the days are hot, dry, and dusty. But the sun soon dries out the cut hay so that it can be raked into windrows, long rows of the fallen hay. It is then picked up by a huge machine called a hay press, which collects it, presses it, and binds it into bales, all in one operation, and then deposits the bales back on the ground. So you can see how modern machinery has made the work much easier. But the bales are heavy, and the men must still collect them in the trucks, and then feed them onto the conveyor belts that carry them to the haystacks. Even in good years, there are many times when the summer is long and most of the pastures become dead-looking and dry, with nothing to replace them until the autumn rains bring up the new grass. The farmer then uses his reserves and feeds stock from the silage and hay he has stacked away in the spring and the early summer. In the good years, sheep are not the only stock seen on these highland properties. Some farmers graze cattle as well and use them to eat down the tall pastures before turning the sheep into graze. These are Aberdeen Angus, but on many sheep farms in these areas, the brown and white Hereford cattle can be seen. If there is a drop in the price of wool, these beef cattle will add to the farmer's income. Farm life can be exciting for children during the holidays, but in term time, they must go to school just like city children. The school is too far to walk to, so the local farmers help to pay for a school bus to take their children to the nearest school in the township of Ruffy. It is many miles to school and a slow journey also along winding mountain roads. only 30 children at this school, and in the one classroom as many as 7 grades are taught at one time. When these children reach secondary level, they have to go even further from home to the large country towns. The most exciting time on a farm is when the shearing has to be done. Each day before shearing commences, the farmer will be up early to muster a number of sheep and drive them close to the homestead. Then they will be yarded and moved into the shearing shed as they're wanted. Sheep at most times are stubborn creatures, but the well-trained sheepdog knows where they must go and makes them go there. Electric power is not available on this farm, so the tractor is harnessed up to drive the machines and work begins in earnest. But before shearing begins, the overseer, and he's usually the wool classer too, sharpens and adjusts the shears. During a day's work, these will be sharpened several times. This is a 6-stand shed. 6 shearers work at 6 machines at the one time on what is known as the board, or the floor of the big shed. Beside each stand, the shearer will have his own pen of sheep ready and waiting to be taken on to the board for shearing. It is hard work and requires very great skill. Shearing generally comes only once a year, but because there are different climates throughout Australia at different times of the year, there is nearly always some shearing going on somewhere. So the man with no family ties can, if he wants to, travel constantly round the country, shearing the entire year. But not many men do this. Most prefer to shear near their homes for a few months each year, doing odd jobs on the farm or in country towns for the rest of the time. The sheep must be completely relaxed when being shorn, and the shearer must be careful not to injure the sheep as he takes long blows close to the hide, peeling off the thick white fleece. It is difficult to believe that a skilled man can shear a sheep in 2.5 minutes and can shear as many as 120 to 140 in a day. With weaners and lambs, it is even possible to increase the number to well over 200 a day. One more sheep is finished, and the fleece is then picked up by the rouseabout, the odd job boy of the team. Most of these boys become shearers themselves when they gain experience. Throwing the fleece onto the table so that it falls evenly requires a great deal of practice. Not all the fleece is of the same quality. The outer section of the skirt, as it is called, which were underneath the sheep's body, are separated from the clean wool and are baled and sold separately. Each fleece is classed by the wool classer and is placed in a bin with other fleeces of the same quality. At the end of each shift, the overseer counts the number of sheep that have been shorn by each man, for the shearers are paid for the number of sheep that each one shears. The fleeces are then taken out of the bins, the same quality kept together, and put into the two sections of the wool press. When both are completely filled, one section is moved above the other. Now this great volume of wool is ready to be compressed down to 1/3 of its original size. The average bale, when compressed, weighs 280 to 320 pounds. It contains about 40 fleeces. In a shed of this size, a presser would press as many as 20 bales a day and would be kept busy to do so. After the bales are pressed and labelled, they are loaded onto transports and taken to the nearest capital cities and ports where they're auctioned at wool sales. In 1 year, Australia exports $960 million of wool. This is about 35% of her total exports to all countries. Australian wool is world famous. But to keep its good name, to retain these markets and to maintain the high standard of wool, the farmer must always be alert. He must give special attention to the selection of sheep for breeding. The flock classer will select only the best sheep with the best grades of wool. Those that are below standard will be taken from the flock and sold. Another of the farmer's many jobs is to keep the sheep free from parasites, tiny insects such as lice and ticks. To do this, the sheep must be regularly dipped. This is known as the shower dip. As new and better methods are invented, the farmer is always on the lookout for easier and better ways of doing things. On this farm, the breed of sheep dog is almost as important as the breed of sheep, and these dogs work hard. But they love their work and respect a good master. The farmer spends much time and patience in training them. of the sheep farm is a man with many and great responsibilities. He must guard against drought and disease. He must care for the animals and the people on his property. He is a rugged man who is never afraid of hard work. It is not an easy life, but few would change it for the life and rush in the big city. This is life on a sheep farm.